Hello, all you digital wizards out there. Today I'm going to be showing you how to put this robot into a scene. It is robot integration time! Let's get started. So I'm going to open up that background that I want to use for my robot. And now it's time to integrate him into my scene. I of course want him to kind of blend in, but first I gotta switch my tabs, grab my robot, and do a select all, Control C or edit copy, go back to my scene and Control V to paste it in. I'm now gonna size that down. I want him to kind of sit over here by this tree with his arm behind it, and I'm gonna cut up the background so that I have layers of depth. So to do that, I need to duplicate my scene, and I'm gonna stick the robot in between those two layers. So there's forest on top, forest on the bottom. So right about here, I'm gonna go ahead and grab that top forest layer and add some transparency so I can see exactly where my robot is. The idea here is to use the eraser or to use my lasso or marquee or selection tools to kind of break up the background from the foreground. So I start off by erasing around the robot to make sure that everything is working and using that transparency and things like that to make sure that his hand and his feet are sitting behind the rock. I use a sharper eraser here for where it's closer, just because I don't want it to be soft there. I want it to have a cleaner look. And then once I have that, I go in with my lasso and I start cutting up the background. So you can see, here we go. I'm getting rid of that background on that top layer. And yeah. Now you sort of can see where the background is different from the foreground, and when I turn the visibility on, you can't see anything, but we're going to mess with that background. I'm going to add some blur to it so that it ends up looking like it has some camera depth. So I'm just adding a little bit of blur to the background trees, and then I'm going to add in some hue saturation just to kind of play with that a little bit, because when things are further away, they're going to be a little bit darker, a little more blue, and you're actually going to lose some of that contrast as well. So that's what I'm adding into that background. So again, I'm using brightness, contrast, hue saturation, and I'm adding a blur in. So to add the color correction ones, that's under adjustment, and to add the blur, that's under filter. At this point, I switch to my robot layer and I tried a hue saturation to try and bring some green into the robot, but that wasn't quite working. And I even tried to colorize. So I tried switching over to levels. So I went to adjustment, levels. And in here, I can actually choose the green levels and kind of play with that and add a little green to my robot. So we have some reflection going on from the outside trees. You have to think about this with any environment. If something is has an orange background, you want your character to take on some of those orange hues. And if it has a purple background, same deal, you'll have it take on some of those purple hues, but since he's in a forest, we're taking on some of those green hues that he needs. So that looks much better, and I'm actually going to make an empty layer to start adding in some shadows and things like that. So I'm actually going to make a gradient here that's going to go through the whole thing, and then I'm going to use a blend mode to kind of blend it all together. So I'm choosing what I want to do, so I'm using a dark green blue. And then I'm going to switch this color here in the middle to be a little more of a lighter green. And then once I have what I want to switch my empty layer to the top. And then I'm going to go to the very top where it says gradient, because that's not the right color. And I need to switch it to the colors that I wanted. I can also switch the colors right here on these little boxes and decide how much opacity I want as well. And you can do a radial gradient, which might be easier depending on what your scene is. But for me, I'm going to do this linear gradient, kind of decide how I want it to look, and then I'm going to switch it to a multiply. Actually, no, I'm going to try and decide which one I want. I think soft light is the best. I'm just going to lower the transparency on that. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add some shadows to the robot itself so it feels grounded. So I'm going to get that marquee tool, go back to my robot layer, give it some feather. And I'm going to start with the bottom here because he should be having some shadows underneath him, and just going to, use a brightness contrast. And just lower that brightness a bit until it starts to feel like a shadow. There's also going to be a contact shadow between the robot and the tree, so I'm just going to grab the side there where he's kind of close to the tree and give it another shadow with another adjustment, brightness contrast. Now that's starting to look good, and of course I'm using Control D to deselect when I need to. I'm giving it a little more of a feather here, and I'm going to play with the side of the head here. So since this is supposed to have some depth to it, I'm actually going to give this area on the robot, the outside area, just a tiniest of blurs. And by using that selection tool, that blur will only show up on that part of the robot. Now that I've put those shadows onto the robot, I'm switching over to my foreground layer so that I can add those shadows to the tree, because of course the robot's going to be putting some shadows onto the environment around him, including the rocks underneath him and things like that. So I'm going to grab that part of the tree and again do another adjustment, brightness contrast, and just lower that brightness a bit so that it looks like there's a shadow on the tree. That looks way better. And now I'm just kind of adding a little bit more of a shadow here on that robot. Now I'm going to do a little more of a shadow right where his legs contact with the rock. And really a lot of this is just trying to figure out where the shadows need to go. So we have officially integrated our robot, and I think it looks amazing. Do me a favor, guys, if you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, and that way you can be informed about every new video that comes out in the future. Till next time.